Welcome back to our channel where we provide updates and undisclosed narratives on Catherine, Princess of Wales and her royal family. We provide you with the exciting news: King Charles's unprecedented move to ban Camilla from royal events shocked everyone. An insider source alleges that King Charles has exiled Queen Camilla to a monastery after a palace coup that disrupted a royal event. Buckingham Palace is experiencing unprecedented instability due to bombshell insider claims indicating that King Charles III has essentially banished Queen Camilla to a secluded clandestine convent. The extreme action was purportedly implemented after a disastrous scandal that sources claim devastated one of the most important diplomatic events of the king's reign, resulting in the monarch's humiliation and casting doubt on the stability of the House of Windsor. The palace's official statement was, as usual, a model of calm understatement. The statement indicated that the Queen was temporarily withdrawing from all public duties on medical council, necessitating a phase of rest and recuperation. However, beneath the meticulously crafted veneer of royal propriety, a significantly more tumultuous and detrimental narrative has surfaced, a narrative of underlying animosity, a flagrant act of rebellion, and a covert insurrection that incapacitated Windsor Castle. A top courtier speaking anonymously disclosed to this magazine, "This transcends a mere marital dispute. It constitutes a constitutional crisis unfolding in private." What was intended to be a moment of pride and historical significance for the monarchy devolved into complete disorder. The repercussions were so grave that the king saw it imperative to act promptly and resolutely to save the crown. The event was the state dinner for the visiting German President Frank-Walter Steinmeier, a carefully orchestrated occasion intended to highlight British diplomacy and the soft power of the newly established Carolean period. Instead, it evolved into the catalyst for a very personal conflict. Today, we unveil the startling reality of this royal exile, from the first murmurs of insurrection to the last harrowing act of expulsion that has relegated a queen to mute isolation and a king presiding over a divided court. The origins of discontent, the narrative that prompted the old stones of Windsor to murmur, did not start with a vociferous proclamation or a sensational headline. The event started in the quiet, opulent setting of the green drawing room, where the fragrance of fresh flowers and polished beeswax failed to conceal the tangible tension. On a brisk October morning, King Charles assembled his inner circle to complete the arrangements for the German state visit, the first in almost 30 years and a critical element of his post-Brexit diplomatic strategy. The king saw the event as a pivotal occasion of his early reign, emblematic of a contemporary, globally oriented Britain. His voice, composed and commanding, resonated across the lofty hall as he spoke to his family. "This transcends mere diplomacy," he said, his eyes across the table. "We are presenting an image of Britain to Europe. Each detail must be impeccable." In attendance were the principal figures of the reformed monarchy, the Prince of Wales, his son and successor exuding a subtle assurance, the Princess Royal Anne consistently embodying discipline and duty, and the Princess of Wales Catherine, whose composure and public acclaim rendered her an invaluable asset to the crown. Queen Camilla, her demeanor a facade of royal poise, sat opposite the king. Charles started the allocation of duties with meticulous accuracy. Prince William, with his inherent charisma and composed demeanor, would preside over the ceremonial welcome and provide the inaugural toast. Princess Anne, with her esteemed reputation, would coordinate with the Foreign Office to manage the complex security requirements. Catherine, the contemporary embodiment of the monarchy, was responsible for overseeing the press corps and shaping the visual narrative of the visit. "The attention will inevitably be directed towards you," the king said, a subtle, pleased grin on his lips as he spoke to his daughter-in-law. Subsequently, there was a cessation. The hush was short, lasting just a few seconds, but amid the frenzied atmosphere of the royal court, it was a profound and resounding stillness. Ultimately, the king directed his attention towards his spouse. "Camilla," he said, his tone neutral and straightforward, You will manage the seating arrangements for the banquet and the floral decorations for the reception areas. To an observer, the function may have seemed fitting, even elegant, a conventional duty for a queen consort. In that room at that time, the words struck with the permanence of an insult etched in granite. For a woman who had battled for decades for acceptance, endured public disdain, incessant comparisons, and the enduring shadow of her predecessor to ultimately stand beside the king, it was a profound affront. It was not a position. It was a demotion. She was requested to arrange flowers, while the heir to the throne handled state affairs. Camilla's gloved hands positioned on the polished mahogany table quivered almost imperceptibly. Her expression, though exemplified, cultivated neutrality. William meticulously avoided her sight across the table and made a little modification to her notes, and Catherine provided a kind, almost undetectable nod. Silence enveloped the room, accompanied by an abrupt cold. Upon the meeting's conclusion, the others exited promptly, their footsteps reverberating across the elongated hallway. Camilla stayed seated, her gaze focused on the draft of the proceedings in front of her. Her name, positioned last even under Catherine's, appeared to sear the paper, signifying a subtle but significant treachery. The rhythmic ticking of a nearby carriage clock signified the passage of time as she said the phrase to herself, the sarcasm evident in each syllable. Reception room decorations. A person affiliated with the Queen's household subsequently commented on the incident. She believed she had merited her position. She had withstood the insufferable. To be designated as queen only to discover that her principal role was that of an event designer was the worst humiliation. She saw it as validation of her profound apprehension that she would always occupy the role of consort, the other woman a queen in title but never in authority. By midday, Windsor was bustling with activity. Attendants rushed through the hallways carrying trays of crystal glasses. Florists deliberated the exact hues of roses for the state dining room. Secretaries managed an incessant influx of calls. Nevertheless, Queen Camilla remained confined inside the secured confines of her private quarters. A pot of her preferred Darjeeling tea presented on a silver tray remained untouched. Her loyal lady-in-waiting, a long-serving assistant identified as Mrs. Eleanor Hill, approached the room cautiously. "Your Majesty," she whispered, "may I commence organizing the seating arrangements with His Majesty's office?" Camilla pivoted from the window, an unusual, somewhat whimsical gleam in her eyes. "Such a measure is unnecessary, Eleanor. Meetings are just meetings. Decisions are decisions." She paused, her tone becoming more incisive and intentional. "However, this evening we shall organize matters distinctively. Mrs. Hill would subsequently recollect that it was not the words themselves that were disconcerting, but the terrifying conviction with which they were said. It was the tone of a woman who had ultimately permanently ceased awaiting permission. The evening the crown quaked. The evening at Windsor Castle was intended for serene preparation, another refined segment in the life of a king, before a significant state event. The archaic fortifications were outlined against a waning purple sky. A profound quiet enveloped the antique hallways, interrupted only by the faint muted noises of a palace preparing for the next day. King Charles, after finishing a late conversation with the Prime Minister, was certain that he had the matter under control. The diplomatic formalities were adhered to, the speeches sanctioned, and the timetable refined to perfection. In a secluded room in the West Wing, a less formal deed was imminent, an explosive insurrection that would indelibly mark his rule. Queen Camilla was seated alone at an imposing wood desk with the final leather-bound edition of the state dinner program displayed before her. Her eyes scrutinized the precisely written lines of the order of proceedings, first, once, then again. The reality upon realization was as harsh as it was exact. Her contribution to the planning meeting was minimal. Her inclusion in the official program was absent. No words recognized her work title or position. In the official account of one of the most distinguished nights of her husband's reign, Queen Camilla had been successfully omitted. The revelation, as explained by a person close to her, ignited a long-simmering fuse. The years of enduring tolerance without genuine celebration, the many public engagements when she maintained a forced grin under incessant scrutiny, and the perpetual implicit juxtaposition with the revered Diana all culminated in a singular incisive act of resistance. The subsequent events have been reconstructed from the muted testimonies of a few frightened employees. It is referred to inside the palace as the 10-minute rebellion. As King Charles approached the royal library, he saw an unusual flickering light emanating from behind the door of the next study. It was neither the gentle, consistent radiance of a candle. It was too intense, vibrant, and furious. He forcefully opened the thick oak door and halted abruptly. Before him, outlined against the majestic stone fireplace, was Camilla. Her demeanor was disconcertingly serene, her fair hair reflecting the amber radiance of a freshly ignited fire. In her possession was the official state banquet file, the same paperwork he had authorized several hours before. With a measured, tranquil move, she grasped a fountain pen and, in a strong, audacious script, crossed out the line, "Approved by His Majesty King Charles III." Below it, she inscribed with careful, deliberate strokes, "Presided over by Her Majesty Queen Camilla." Subsequently, she silently discarded the whole file into the fire. The vellum sheets adorned with the royal crest curled immediately. The borders radiated a vivid orange before the ink of the king's signature darkened, causing the whole paper to disintegrate into a shower of gray ash. Charles was immobilized, a tempest of emotions, disbelief, rage, and a semblance of deep sorrow contending on his visage. His voice upon discovery was a taut, strained whisper. "Camilla, what actions have you undertaken?" She remained unperturbed. She turned to confront him, the firelight flickering in her eyes, rendering them as hard as diamonds. Her speech was composed and devoid of emotion, making it even more unsettling. "Dignity. Charles," she said, "is reserved for those who are acknowledged. I am unequivocally regaining what was conspicuously stolen from me." The words lingered in the air between them, dense and unavoidable, like the smoke ascending towards the arched ceiling. The fire in the hearth, once a symbol of warmth and domesticity, now raged like a gulf of division. "You have just compromised your own dignity," he said, his voice quivering with hardly contained fury. Camilla presented a subtle, joyless grin, her eyes fixed on the ascending flames. "You may extinguish the fire, Charles," she murmured, "but you cannot erase the memory of its origin." At that time, the dispute transcended the issue of a state supper. The matter pertained to authority, esteem, and a lifetime of imagined grievances. The painting of Diana, Princess of Wales, adorned the study. Her tranquil gaze seemed to observe the unfolding drama, a quiet, evaluative presence. Some report that Charles saw the painting as the papers incinerated, and for a fleeting, eerie instant, the room seemed extraordinarily frigid. The fire was little confined to the fireplace, however it destroyed precious items. That night signified not only the loss of a diplomatic document, it represented the silent, tragic disintegration of the tenuous peace that had sustained their marriage. The trust meticulously restored over decades was vanished, reduced to ash and smoke, wafting over the great stones of Windsor. As Charles ultimately turned and departed, his hands balled into fists at his sides, the Queen stood resolutely, a single and unyielding figure backlit by the remaining embers of the extinguishing fire. A servant would subsequently discover her there hours later, immobile, gazing into the ashes, as if seeing her own reflection vanish. The covert overthrow. The hush that enveloped Windsor after the fire was more oppressive and ominous than any dispute. The palace had succumbed to darkness early. However, in the West Wing, a solitary light persisted throughout the night. Within, Queen Camilla occupied a seat beside a window, a neglected cup of tea becoming cold beside her. Charles's remarks from their conflict echoed in her thoughts, not due to their intensity, but for their frigid, incisive accuracy. He labeled her as irresponsible, charged her with sabotage, and used a tone that immediately marginalized her to the status of an outsider, the same condition she had tried her whole life to transcend. By daylight, the profound, intense pain had solidified into a cold determination. There will be no more tears, no supplication, no silent anguish. If she were to be seen as an adversary inside the gates, she would govern the castle. At around 3:00 a.m., she called for Mrs. Hill. The devoted assistant, who had accompanied her since her tenure as a private individual in Wiltshire, entered the room and immediately saw that a boundary had been transgressed. The Queen's tone was composed, her directives intentional and merciless. By morning, Eleanor, she said, I desire every key position in this palace to be occupied by our individuals, each and every one. Thus began the covert coup. As the first gray light of the October morning illuminated the castle grounds, a perfectly coordinated reorganization transpired with astonishing speed and efficiency. Senior personnel, some of whom had dedicated decades to the monarchy, were abruptly awakened and terminated. Alistair Finch, the king's valet for over 2 decades, was notified that his services were no longer needed. Mrs. Gable, the chief housekeeper at Windsor during the tenure of the late Queen, was removed from the premises prior to the arrival of the daytime workers for their shifts. Unmarked vehicles came discreetly before breakfast. Recognizable individuals disappeared before anybody had the opportunity to say a farewell. By midday, fresh personnel selected by Camilla for their devotion discretion and, crucially, their fidelity to her occupied the corridors. The alterations were far more substantial than just superficial, yet the superficial modifications were really startling. In a matter of hours, the palace started its transformation. The thick burgundy carpets in the major halls were removed and replaced with cream and gold hues that, according to Camilla, exemplified a more contemporary elegance. The configuration of royal portraits, a revered exhibition of heritage and history, was significantly modified. A majestic image of King Charles in his garter robes was discreetly relocated, supplanted by Camilla's coronation portrait, which now occupies the most prominent position in the Great Reception Hall. In a striking move, Camilla mandated a whole remodeling of the private sitting area that had long housed a treasured collection of images commemorating Diana. The photographs were deleted and stored. She replaced them with a huge, vivid artwork by David Hockney. Upon the hesitation of one of her new assistants, she quelled him with a singular, frigid remark. "This is a living palace, not a mausoleum. We must cease venerating phantoms." The palace had never experienced anything such. Certain courtiers referred to it as decisive leadership. Others murmured the term revenge in subdued and apprehensive tones. Upon receiving news of the unfolding events, King Charles was engaged in a morning briefing about the amended and swiftly reprinted itinerary for the German visit. He allegedly dropped his spoon, which clanged noisily on his saucer, while perusing the urgent report from his private secretary. 6 hours. That was all that was required. His personnel departed, the pictures were reorganized, and the whole ambiance of Windsor was transformed in his wife's likeness. He traversed the corridors later that morning, an unfamiliar presence in his own home. He saw new individuals who rendered rigid formal bows, their gazes first directed at her, before recognizing him. Charles comprehended for the first time. The altercation in the research was not just a dispute. It constituted a declaration of war. What he had seen as a mere emotional outburst had evolved into a deliberate strategic maneuver. Camilla never yelled nor threatened. She operated with the silent, lethal precision of a great strategist until the palace yielded solely to her authority. The German president was welcomed with all the necessary grandeur and formalities. The smiles were there, the toasts were spoken, and the supper epitomized regal elegance. However, underneath each refined motion was a tension so intense that it was almost palpable. Camilla arrived with a tranquil smile, although her demeanor was that of a victor. Insiders saw the rupture. The audience saw perfection. However, the monarchy founded on the facade of unity and serenity had exposed a fissure that no degree of formality could obscure. Princely intervention. In the following weeks, the palace became colder due to the poison in the air, not fall weather. Windsor, once the symbol of royal continuity, was now a divided castle in a quiet civil war. Stress had plainly impacted the king. Health, previously a source of mild concern, has declined. His doctors told him to avoid stress due to his persistent cough. How could he, when the crown was his biggest burden? King Charles was alone in his quarters, only disturbed by an antique clock and his heavy breathing. His desk was covered with unsigned mail and official papers. His pen ink shook as he held the phone. "You must return, William," he said, his voice strained and pleading. Promptly, "Your stepmother is making your family a show, and the kingdom is taking notice." An unassuming black Jaguar crossed Windsor's gates at nightfall. There were no cameras or fans, just tires crunching gravel. Prince William emerged with his jaws clenched and coat tightened against the cold. The guards bowed, gaze set down as if the air had stopped breathing. He found the castle strange. Strange scents pervaded the air, new artwork adorned the walls, and in the enormous hall, the king's royal insignia was subservient to Queen Camilla's portrait. It was like remaking history before his eyes. An immediate audience with the queen was requested. The new attendant who led him along the halls appeared apprehensive, staring toward Camilla's apartments as if he feared what was inside. Tuberose and sandalwood filled the hall with a strong scent as the doors opened. Camilla sat serenely on a chaise longue with a glass of wine. Her smile was fake. "William," she remarked calmly but rudely, "what compels the heir apparent to hastily return to the castle? Has your father grown too weak to face his challenges?" William first stayed mute. He put a thin manila folder on the table in front of her in the center of the room. Newspaper clippings, social media analytics, and journalist briefing summaries were provided. His unrelenting tone cut through the tension like ice. He added, "I am here to conclude this, Your Majesty, with studied formality. The palace is not your private arena, and the performance has ended." Camilla nodded, amused and furious. "Do you presume to address me this way?" she whispered. William said, "I am not my father," with a firm tone. "I won't agree. Media owns the narrative. They know about the fire. They know the staff. They know about the coup. It's contained now. A few rumors and unconfirmed claims. It won't stay that way. No longer could my father protect you from the consequences." Silence ruled the room for a long time. The candlelight cast long, twisted shadows on their faces, one representing the sad past and the other the inexorable future. William left with piercing cold words like the November wind shattering the windows. To maintain a semblance of dignity, you must disappear before it is publicly stripped. A peaceful trip to the countryside, or a headline-grabbing scandal that would destroy this home, is my choice. I know my preference. The door closed with a thunderous thud that resonated through the corridors like an ending narrative. Camilla stayed immobile, her pale fingers holding her wineglass stem. After temporarily ruling the palace, the queen sat alone, surrounded by her crumbling dominion. The silent exile news broke like a hushed, organized storm, chilling, methodical, and significant. The official declaration, "Queen Camilla will temporarily withdraw from public duties," was released by all major news channels. Now, in the king's control, the palace's communications team mentioned medical advice and an extended period of rest. The fact was generally accepted in Windsor's dimly lighted halls. It was no relief. Elimination. This was not a break. It was exile. King Charles signed the order in his own office that morning. He held the heavy pen, hesitated, and wrote his name on the clean paper while rain fell from the Gothic windows. His face showed royal grief, but others around grasped the deed's irreversibility. He nodded to his confidential secretary and sealed the document with the sovereign's seal. A modest three-vehicle convoy left Windsor Castle's side gate in the afternoon. No royal banners or cameras were present, just the continuous drone of engines north on the M1. Camilla stood motionless in the lead car, makeup-free for the first time in decades. She wore modest tweed. She didn't ask their destination. She knew. Like a fading film farm's towns and the remnants of her civilization unfurled across England. Each mile brought her closer to an old, austere abbey on the Yorkshire moors, freezing windswept hills away from crowns and cameras. The automobile stopped on the Abbey of St. Hilda's gravel road, where a small group of nuns waited, black-clad calm, with a pleasant yet watchful gaze. The abbess approached with a tilt. "Welcome, madam," she said softly. "We received your arrival notice." They led her to a small, austere room via stone-paved passageways. A single bed with a woolen blanket, a wooden rocker, and an arched window overlooking a walled garden. Mirrors, gilt frames, and silk curtains were absent. It felt like time stopped there. "This residence exudes tranquility," a younger nun commented. "In this place you may relinquish your burdens." Camilla never learned to give up power. She sat on the bed's edge, hands in lap, staring at the gray bell tower through the fogged glass. London lights illuminated the area. Charles's lights. The William lights. Catherine illuminates. Theirs now, not hers. The woman who stood by a king has vanished into the English countryside, replaced by whispers and stillness. The official narrative was being constructed in London. Times praised King Charles's composed and steadfast leadership. The Guardian called the decision challenging yet essential for the crown's stability. Suddenly, Camilla's name disappeared from headlines. No outrage or compassion was shown. Absence ruled. Days became weeks. Camilla seldom spoke, ate little, and spent long times alone in the monastery's wet, well-kept gardens. She stared at a stone statue of the Virgin Mary, with her lips scarcely moving, according to a novice nun. "Are you praying, madam?" the nun asked softly. Camilla said raspily and distantly. "No," she responded, turning away. "I am assessing my losses." Her exile became a haunting tale spoken in authority as a warning against the queen who approached the sun too closely. The Windsor incident of 2024 was skillfully repressed, becoming a footnote in a strongly advancing reign. The woman who sought to change her history was quietly erased by it. Maybe irrelevance was the harshest consequence, not shame. The monarchy refines its image and plans forward while the Yorkshire Abbey bells ring gently over the moors. Behind those cold stone walls, a former queen sits at her window, aware of her surroundings. All sounds, wind, rain, distant chime, remind her of a world that has abandoned her. The fire she started at Windsor has been out, but the ashes remain as a somber reminder of the cost of a crown. Thank you for watching the video. Please let us know your thoughts and goodbye for now.